Greetings everyone. Welcome to the 12th edition of the Online Educational Leadership Forum panel discussion series focused on transforming education for human flourishing. Thank you so much for investing your time with us on a weekday. My name is Aaryan Salman and I'm the moderator for this panel discussion. Today we have a stellar panel that will discuss the question, can we put lifelong learning into the learning agenda, in our series entitled Education in the Times of Corona, where we'll be discussing the ideas around embedding the concept of lifelong learning. Can we do it? If yes, then how? If not, then how can we go about it? We will also highlight the role of embedding the concept of lifelong learning in empowering educators and learners to unleash their potential and foster human flourishing. Also, we'll be sharing relevant and related resources with you within 72 hours of this live broadcast. So check out the event page on our website, globalcitizenshipfoundation.org, after 72 hours, or follow us on our social media profiles to receive the latest updates on the same. In the previous 11 editions of the OELF, we explored the various dimensions of education in the times of Corona and beyond. The recordings of the previous 11 panel discussions and the live broadcast of this panel discussion are available both on our website and on our social media channels, including YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So join us on our social media pages and be part of our current and future initiatives. To receive your certificate of participation, please fill in the special certificate request form that will be made available right at the end of the panel discussion on the respective platforms, including Zoom, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We hope to dispatch your certificates by 15th of August. I also hope that you will continue to support us by actively sharing your ideas, suggestions, and feedback, and help us in improving the way we serve you and boost our efforts in advancing the discourse on transforming education for human flourishing. As you know, we continue to live in increasingly challenging and uncertain times with enormous changes and disruptions to our lives and our professions. It is a moment for us to assume active global citizenship and support those in need. Having said that, I would also like to take this moment to mark a minute of silence to those who have lost their lives to the pandemic, the grieving individuals and families, and in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement in the US and around the world and for humanity. So let's take a minute of let's mark a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you. Now we ring the bell to thank and honor the healthcare workers, our educators, and others on the front line who are carrying out essential roles selflessly, continuing their day-to-day duties inside and outside the home in support of us all. Thank you. The Online Education Leadership Forum was started with an objective to provide a platform for educators and educational leaders to shape, empower, influence, and advance the discourse on, and be a springboard aiding action towards transforming education for human flourishing. Never in the last 100 years have we seen such a massive disruption to learning across the world. Educators have been going beyond their call of duty and mandate to support learners and learning in this unprecedented learning crisis proactively. For many, this has been a moment of realization and reaffirmation as to why we educate or what exactly are our reasons of educating our children. As discussed in the previous panel discussion, one of the panelists spoke of how schools prepare young people for an ambiguous future, one that is a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, not exactly knowing the challenges that lie ahead of us in the future, yet preparing for one. Makes this question for today's discussion all the more important and relevant. The question is, can we put lifelong learning into the learning agenda? If we are to empower educators to prepare a generation of young people for a future that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, it is crucial that we put lifelong learning into the learning agenda. How well we embed lifelong learning into the learning agenda will determine how effective we are at transforming education for human flourishing. And indeed, this would help in ensuring that we capture this moment to revolutionize education. Through the Education in the Times of Corona online series, the Global Citizenship Foundation and the Council for Global Citizenship Education are committed to supporting school leaders and educational leaders by connecting experts, practitioners, and educational leaders from across the globe to discuss and share ideas, best practices, and perspectives to navigate and lead through this crisis. So our goal today is, whatever your role is in the education sector, that you'll come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective, a new strategy that you can apply to be more successful at doing what you're doing best, while ensuring that our teachers and our learners embed this concept of lifelong learning that is required to transform education for human flourishing. So here's the format to give you an idea of what to expect. First, we'll take a few minutes to introduce our awesome panelists from the European Union, Ghana, India, and the United States. So this panel has people from 4 continents. So I welcome all of them. Also, once we welcome, I'll kick off the conversation by opening the floor to the panelists. And in the second half of our time today, we'll open the floor to give you an opportunity to directly ask specific questions that you have to our panelists by either posting your questions on the chat platforms on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, and on the question and answer section of Zoom. You can also virtually raise your hand by pressing the reaction button on the bottom of your screen on Zoom. Also, please feel free to share your thoughts and ideas in the chat sections anytime during this discussion and create a learning and engaging experience for all. The idea is to navigate the present and upcoming opportunities, issues, and challenges together to be able to transform education for human flourishing. Sounds good? Great. Let's get started with the panel introductions. It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Lisa Marie Blaschk, Program Director of the Master in Management of Technology Enhanced Learning at the Center for Lifelong Learning at the University of Oldenburg, Germany. Previously, she has served as the Program Director of the Master of Distance Education offered jointly by the University of Oldenburg and the University of Maryland University College. Dr. Lisa is a recipient of the Stanley J. Drazik Teaching Excellence Award. She has earlier served as the Vice President of the European Distance Education and E-Learning Network, EDEN. Currently, she is the Acting Chair of the EDEN Council of Fellows. I take great pleasure in welcoming Professor Alok Bajpai, a psychiatrist at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, India. His work focuses on children, adolescents, youth, and educators. In addition to teaching, he is also a regular columnist on mental health issues, life skills, and socio-political or sociopolitics of life. Additionally, he is the curator of an interactive program called as An Hour with the Mahatma, focusing on transformative skills of Mahatma Gandhi. His MOOC courses on NPTEL, two major courses that are popular are Psychiatry and Overview and How the Brain Creates Mind. He is engaged in interdisciplinary research at the Indian Institute of Technology and has publications in scientific reports exploring brain processes. It is my deepest pleasure to welcome Cassandra Erkins, the lead architect at the Solutions Tree Assessment Center, USA, and an author of several books. Additionally, she is a teacher, facilitator, leader, keynote speaker, and an international consultant working primarily in K-12 schools with teachers and school leaders. Her work focuses on educational topics including assessment, instructions, leadership, and school improvement. She has served from the classroom to the administrative offices in both public and private education organizations. I take immense pleasure in welcoming Kofi Asare, the founder and executive director of Africa Education Watch in Ghana. They're present all over Africa. Kofi is the recipient of the 2015 Millennium Excellence Award for Rural and Urban Development under the patronage of His Royal Majesty Otumfao Osai Tutu, the King of Ashanti. Kofi is a global education policy influencer with almost 2 decades of experience working with schools, communities, international organizations, and government agencies. Additionally, Kofi serves on many high level local and international policy advisory forums. I take immense pleasure in welcoming Dr. Amrita Vora, the Director of Education at GEMS India and Executive Principal at GEMS International School, Gurgaon. She has been an active member of the GEMS Global Education team in Dubai. Dr. Amrita is a certified program leader for Cambridge education programs for teachers and school leaders. In the past, she has worked with Educom Solutions, Global Classroom, and Opportunity International. Now, I open the floor to the panelists by requesting I open the floor by requesting Dr. Amrita Vora to make her initial remarks.
Thank you, Aaryan. I'll start with myself as a child, and don't worry, I won't exceed the time. Uh, I've always been a very, very rebellious kind of a kid because somewhere as a child, I somehow did not connect with the education system that we had back then. There was always a situation where, of course, thanks to my father, I would be transferred from one school to another because we would be moving, and that was great learning, indeed. Change became something which is prominent and permanent, and you learn how to learn. You learn how to learn on your own. You learn not to depend on someone to teach you, and that is something I always felt the minute uh, I somewhere read for the first time, maybe during college, this quote by Margaret Mead, that we need to children how to think, not what to think. It just struck the chord. And I felt, yeah, this is it. This is what was wrong. And yesterday, it was amazing to hear in India our own Prime Minister talking about the new education policy, wherein one of the key things he said was exactly this: we need to shift the focus from teaching children what to think to how to think. This is the need of the hour, has always been, and now even more so. The world is changing at a very, very, very fast pace. People thought about changing jobs earlier. Now, within a span of 5 years, people do think about changing careers completely. And unlearning, relearning is the new skill. We have to adapt that. Alvin Toffler's already said it: the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot unlearn, relearn, learn, and so on. So I'll not go on quoting people, but what I want to say here is that the most key thing for learning to genuinely happen is for the child to be allowed to have that free space where the child can explore. Each child actually carves out his or her own way to learning. They don't get led. That's how they learn to walk. That's how they learn to talk. Nobody really gives them a curriculum for that. They fall endlessly. We as humans, we are born with this innate ability to be resilient. Actually, you fall and you bounce back, and you try again, and each time you set a little target for yourself and you're learning. This metacognitive ability that we already have inbuilt uh, gets rationally crushed over a period of time in a very structured education system, which was designed for the Industrial Revolution. It was not designed for our world today. It was very much designed for the Industrial Revolution. I think we need to get out of it, get above it. What it needs urgently is depth. Depth in terms of, we don't need to learn, memorize things. Technology can do a lot of all that already. What we now need to be able to do is understand what the world really needs. There is climate change, climate action is urgent. There is a sustainable development which a child needs to learn, so that is urgent. Civic and cultural literacy, living together is important, understanding each other is important, respecting the other is important. Uh, that is urgent. Not everybody, again, can learn everything. So, diversified learning or differentiated instruction is again very, very key. We talk of 21st century skills, we are already halfway into the century, but we talk of collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, communication. These are important, and certainly every child should have them, but not everybody may excel at everything. So it's very important to allow them to choose, to carve their own way in this process, and to facilitate that process. That's how learning really needs to genuinely get into the child's hands and become genuinely metacognitive, and that's when it happens best, when it's spontaneous, when it is really life itself. That's when learning is for life. So thank you, Aaryan. Over
Thank
to
you so much, Dr. Amrita. Now I yield the floor to uh, Cassandra. Cassandra, you're on mute. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for this opportunity to be with you today. I really appreciate it, and I love all the work that your organization is doing. I agree with what Amrita said right now, and wholeheartedly endorse all of that. This pandemic has certainly caused us to have to step back and take a look at really what is most important and how do we move our children forward. When we talk about that COVID slide and everybody sliding backwards, how are we going to help our kids caught back up again? And this skill, lifelong learning, it's not new, and we needed it long before a pandemic ever hit. But now here we are, and there's nothing better that we could do to serve our students today than to help them figure out how to unlearn and relearn, as Amrita just said. So I think there are three things that we would have to do to get that to happen. The first is we cannot take for granted that all kids automatically know how to learn. So if you think about, lots of us know people who know who are capable of hearing but do not necessarily listen. So there are some skills involved, right? We would have to teach our kids to self-regulate, to self-assess, to navigate challenge and conflict, to mitigate failure. You do have to pick yourself back up and be resilient, but there's a skill set to some of that. We also, I believe, have to teach kids how to collaborate when you are trying to do lifelong learning. That is not something that you do in a vacuum. So how do you interact with the world around you to make that kind of work happen? I believe schools need to be places, and I have certainly seen this in our country and in America right now, where we need to be places where it's allowed for kids to take intellectual risk and to make mistakes. Right now in our systems, a lot of children were not allowed those opportunities during this pandemic, and stress was high. Teachers were using assessments that were timed to make sure kids weren't cheating, and that only added to the stress. So can we create spaces where it is safe to take intellectual risks, to think deeply, to construct new knowledge, and to possibly make mistakes along the way and not have that be held against you? We have a tendency to assess and evaluate everything that moves. And with all those scores, there's no opportunity for students to be able to, I do want kids to fail, and I want them to fail while they're in our care so we can help them through that so that they can be successful and learn how to navigate those spaces. And finally, I believe we have to have some really important assessment skills for our teachers. Some ways where we're engaging kids in authentic intellectual work while they're taking those risks. So Dr. Fred Newman and Bruce King and Dana Tanaka Carmichael would talk about authentic intellectual work as having three components, where kids are constructing new knowledge. They're not simply gathering information from the internet and spewing it back out. They're actually putting things together and constructing new information. And actually, when you think about this, there's no other place in the world where people go every day so that they can solve problems for which there are already known answers. And our children are facing real world problems that they could help be solving today. We see kids being very innovative in our world. So they would be constructing new knowledge. They would be engaged in disciplined inquiry, where they would have to do extensive and additional work and think like that discipline. How does a real mathematician function? How does a real writer function? Not through a scaffold of first you have a topic sentence and 3 supporting details, but really how does that writing process play out? And finally, they need to be making connections or seeing value beyond school. I'm not doing this for the sake of learning. I'm sorry, I'm not doing this for the sake of pleasing the teacher. I am doing this so that I learn and can make an application and a valued contribution to our world. So I loved what Amarita just said, where she talked about we're learning how to think and not what to think. I think the ends and the means have to switch places, right? We used to use skills to learn content, and now we need content to learn skills, and so that we can become lifelong learners. I don't think there's a more important skill that we could be giving our kids today, especially in this pandemic situation, than to learn how to pull themselves up and be survivors.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cassandra. Now I yield the floor to Dr. Alok.
Thanks, Aaryan. I would just start from the point to which Amrita and Cassandra have brought the discussion to. What Amrita said was absolutely right. We are a product of last 150 years of schooling across the world, which in itself was a product of industrialization. And see what has happened. The quality of life has improved, dreams have expanded, but on the flip side, in equal measures, what has come through is devastation, injustice, wars, and whatnot. Corona, I think, apart from the illness threat and death threat, when we will examine history, whenever, I think it is an opportunity for people to peep inside their heads. And if some transformation can come through, especially in education. And what is the problem with education? What was the problem with this 150 years of education, a product of which are sitting and discussing right now? All this while, we were being taught a knowledge which was not true knowledge. It was a subject knowledge in most countries. US and Europe and other countries have modified. In India, probably we will modify, as Amrita told, with our new education policy, but yet to be seen. What has happened that all this while kids across the world were trying to be good in the subject, not interested in the subject. Now, unless you are interested, you are not going to have an instinct to do a lifelong learning. We know neuroscience today, there is a neuroplasticity in the brain. Involuntarily, we keep learning. Today also, when we are talking, we are learning. But all this is involuntary learning. To have a goal-directed learning beyond the box of the school, it requires an interest. So the question does not come to the kids. The question comes to those who are teaching. Whether they want to appear knowledgeable with their obscure language, or they want to be simple so that it appeals to the kid. It again brings to another question now, what Amrita had already mentioned. What should we teach? And how should we teach? How we know? Do not remove the kids from the experiential learning. Even if you're teaching them physics, you teach them physics which is there around us. That will trigger the interest. There may be a debate, but beyond the subjects, let me tell you, there's certain thing which needs to be taught to kids. Because if we do not, the next pandemic will really kill us mentally. It's already killing us. Unless we develop critical thinking. And what is critical thinking? Each mind should be able to decide between the need and greed. And that can only come if you really develop empathy. Mahatma Gandhi knew it. So he was always talking about it. But embedded learning also has to happen within the context of life. But it actually requires a hell lot of change in the mindset of those who are planning education across the world. Do we want skill-based zombies? Don't worry about them. Anyway, you'll have AI and artificial super intelligence will work for us. So are human beings going to evolve their brain in tandem with the AI which is coming in, or they are going to just stuck and become slaves of this technology? Because then our basic purpose of what and how will be lost. Whatever machines direct us, we'll do it. So it's very important at this juncture, and I'm very happy that India has at least started looking on those lines. It is also related to mental health. Lack of purpose is the basic cause of problems in the mind for 80% of the people. Forget about those 20% who have illnesses. So where does the lack of purpose come? Lack of purpose comes from disinterest. Disinterest comes if you are caught in your daily grind, which I think the 80% of the world is caught in the daily grind of life. So this whole lifelong learning, which is innate and natural to us, should be nurtured from the beginning by keeping a interest alive in what you are studying and applying it to life, as Cassandra said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Bajpai. I yield the floor now to Kofi. Kofi, you're on mute.
Okay, yeah, I just realized it. Yeah. Thank you. Interesting insights. As COVID emerges and continues to disrupt, global activities, one of the sectors which COVID has hit hard is the social sector. And in Africa, the biggest social sector is education sector, followed by the health sector. As a policy practitioner, I have been concerned much about the extent to which COVID is disrupting education with respect to its impact on the limitation on the hours that instructors would have with learners, and then also its impact on how the new technology is being deployed as a solution to the distancing and then also lockdown occasioned by COVID are exclusive. And so you have a situation where, as a result of COVID, instruction is being delivered through virtual means. And on a continent where about 1/3 has no access to electricity, then you have a situation where you are virtually cutting out a majority of both children and adult learners who are supposed to be beneficiaries of this innovative online content that has become necessary because of the disruptions of COVID. Apart from that, because it has created an emergency situation, most countries seem to, and indeed, have relegated concerns relating to the level of inclusivity of interventions being deployed as an alternative to interface engagement in instruction. And so persons with disability, especially persons with visual impairment and also hearing impairment, normally struggle to find their needs integrated within these technologies being rolled out, to bridge the gap between the instructor and then the learner. But, it is because of the situation we find ourselves in, because we find ourselves in an emergency, the focus is rather on trying to salvage the situation for the majority instead of having time to think about the needs of the minority. And that I refer to as persons with disability and also children who live in rural areas. Apart from that, it has also reignited the discussion around online safety, because as children and as adults begin to engage more in the learning process through technology, children especially have been more exposed to the dangers of an insecure internet than ever before. And so issues of child online protection and how systems across Africa are not pro children and are not necessarily, targeted at ensuring that the internet is safer for children, have become gullible. And so, but because the focus is on trying to prioritize extension of internet and infrastructure, e-learning infrastructure to communities without this, very little is actually considered when it comes to the interest of and the security of children in this case. In all this discussion about how COVID has affected both formal, non-formal, and informal education, especially in a lifelong context, a missing or a relegated aspect of non-formal education has been the difficulty in connecting learners in the skills sector to the new technologies being rolled out. I have seen various country level proposals and also projects for which the World Bank is funding that seek to secure funds from the World Bank, I mentioned earlier, to upgrade the capacity of these countries to expand learning opportunities to the population within COVID. I have reviewed a lot of these proposals. I have reviewed the Nigerian one, the Ghanaian one. Ghana had 15 million. Liberia had about 7 million, about 8 million. Sierra Leone. You come to the realization that in all these country proposals, nothing is mentioned of the skills sector. And so it means that as a lot of countries continue to be in some form of restrictions and lockdown, and as about 2/3 of the schools in Africa are still closed, and as discussions continue about how to reopen the educational sector, very little or nothing is being discussed about how do I put it, about how to engage learners in the skills sector within the pandemic times, because we have rolled out interventions across countries on how to engage school learners using e-schools, television schools, radio schools, etc. But there is no commensurate effort by countries to think through how to roll out interventions to support the training in the informal sector in relation to skills training. And so these are the forgotten aspects of our COVID response that I think we need to have a discussion about if we need to move forward.
Thank you so much, Kofi. I request Dr. Lisa Murray to make her initial remarks.
Okay, thank you, Aaryan. Thank you also for the invitation today. You posed the question to us at the start of this discussion about can we put lifelong learning back on the learning agenda? And for me, the response is yes, and really a resounding yes, because now I think more than ever, it's the best time to really begin planting the seeds and sowing the ground for lifelong learning. This pandemic has forced our instructors and our students to engage in new forms of teaching and learning. It's required our instructors to rethink, as Amrita was saying, to really unthink, relearn, also for them how they're going to teach students, but also for students how to learn and really learning to learn, and helping them to engage and gain more control of their learning in terms of, for example, self-directed or self-determined learning. And so really for me, one of the big questions is, how do we get our students and how do we move them into a place where they're taking more responsibility for their learning? One of the things that's not in my biography is my life before academia, which I spent many years in the software industry. I came over to Germany back in 1990 to work for a small software company. And I saw firsthand, because the company was growing by leaps and bounds, how little university and schools often prepare our students for the complexities of the work world. We would be hiring, I think within a space of a couple of years, the company went from 5,000 to 10,000 to 15,000 to 20,000 people that worked for them. And we were repeatedly hiring, and I was responsible for a lot of that on-ramping. And what I saw was these people the students that we got were very intelligent, they were very educated, but they were not able to adapt to the complexities and the chaos of a software industry, of a software company. But then there were others that were able to do that. They were able to jump in, they were able to hit the floor running. And I thought, these are the students that we need. These are the kinds of people that we need. What can we do to ensure that we get those kinds of students from university? And I went back to university with the sole purpose of getting my master's and my doctorate in order to figure out, why is this? Why is it that we have these two different types of learners, the kinds that engage and are creative and innovative, and those that are passive and wait for you to tell them what it is that they have to do and how they have to do it. And I came across this theory, which is the theory of pedagogy, or self-determined learning. And it focused on a lot of the topics that were discussed already today that Amrita identified: the unlearning, the relearning, knowing how to learn, Cassandra talking about experiential learning, Alok talking about the importance of empathy, and Kofi talking about really the skills focus. This theory talks about giving the learner agency, giving them responsibility for what and how they'll learn, and then that they don't just decide how and what they'll learn. They'll also assess if and whether they have learned it. And including in this theory are aspects of competency, capability development, skills development, reflection, self-efficacy is a big part of that, failing and succeeding, and then getting that sense of success to move you forward, that motivation. And also nonlinear learning, which brings in the whole the affordances that we get from the internet and from technology. So I think pedagogy can play a powerful role in supporting our learners as they develop their lifelong learning skills. And the research that I've done into this area has actually shown that it helps students develop critical thinking. It makes them think out of the box, and it moves them forward in terms of thinking and applying that within new and unique environments, which is what we need within the workforce. And I think for lifelong learning to really occur. And so I think we're in a place now of choice and opportunity. We can see the glass is either half empty or half full. We can wait and hope that things go back to the way they were before with traditional didactic pedagogies, or we can move forward to new ways of teaching and learning. And ways that will help to build up our learners' lifelong learning skills and their competencies. I'm seeing pockets of innovation everywhere right now as teachers they embrace these new ways of teaching, and they look at different ways to use technology to support their teaching and also the student learning. And I'm seeing students do it as well. And so I think we need to help prepare our students to move from a more passive form of learning to a more active form. And so what we call this within my area of study is the pedagogy, andragogy, pedagogy continuum, moving them from passive to self-directed to self-determined learning. So it's really about making the learning experience one that's very learner-centered. And so I guess I would see opportunities, the three opportunities I would identify as being ways to help position lifelong learning. And what I mean by developing the skills of students, incorporating authentic assessment, and Cassandra talked about this, real world examples, problems, scenarios, bringing them, making it contextual for them. Then developing more dialogue with students, flipping the classroom. Please don't spend any time spent, with hour-long lectures. I'm seeing this here, and it's very frustrating because it's not it's not a real good way to be using the technologies we have available to us. And then maximizing the affordances of the technologies to support teaching and learning. There's a lot of opportunities with technology that will support the development of lifelong learning skills, creating and collaborating within the internet, creating new content, exploring new ways of areas of interest and research, connecting with and networking with others. I mean, this is just a really wonderful opportunity, and then sharing that with other people. So I think by doing these, we create a learning environment that really supports lifelong learning. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa Marie. It was a pleasure to have all your initial remarks. Now we move on to the next section where we have the panelist round of questions. So I would request Dr. Lisa Marie to ask a question to one of the panelists. Doctor, you're on mute.
I thought I turned myself back on again. So my question is for Amrita, and it's, you talked about, teaching our children how to think. Okay, so how do we teach our children how to think? How do we shift that focus from what you called the what to think and give them that free space so that they can move from the what to think to the how to think?
Thank you for that question, Lisa. Really, really important. And, this has really been something that I've worked on for years and years. So first and foremost, everything I think in the teaching process, everything in the plan, the lesson plan, when we design it, needs to be about encouraging thinking. Instead of giving information directly to the learner, the teacher really needs to use a lot of questioning. And the most important skill, I think, as a teacher is the skill of identifying the right kind of questions, the very thought-provoking kind of questions. Beginning with, I think Cassandra already pointed out the idea of inquiry, beginning with the problem, giving them the problem, which is very real, which is something they can identify with, and connecting it. The children may not always connect. Some will come out with very, very different ideas, and some may be struggling with it. And it's very important also then for the teacher to be able to identify and help each one as needed. But again, you have to be cautious as to how much you're helping and what you're doing while helping. I mean, you can't really provide the answers to somebody who's not able to, but maybe some cues and clues to redirect them, to support them to reach there. Very important, again, something that we do is self-assessment. Self-assessment has to be built into the process, no matter what and how you're, whatever be the subject and whatever you're doing, because the child needs to identify what we call the yellow boxes, the areas of concern. This is what I've done. I've done this much. What do I need to improve about it? How can this be better? And why does it need to be better? The why and how of things is very, very important. Instead of encouraging children to accept facts for what they are, children are natural at this. Children do ask, why should I do this? You said so. I mean, that never needs to be an answer. It's very, very key to let children ask that why and encourage them instead. The system, on the contrary, has done the opposite. That's why that flip is much needed. So people call it flipped classroom, inquiry, whatever. There are multiple ways of doing it, and schools have come out with different ways and techniques, and I'm sure I'm here to learn many more. But the child needs to be the one asking questions, and we need to encourage that. And the teacher, instead of giving just answers, needs to ask questions again. Questions are like the basis for encouraging thinking.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amrita. Who would you like to ask the question to.
Yeah, thank you. I would ask my question to Professor Alok. Very interesting, and you raised a very, very key aspect of learning today in your talk, wherein you talked about empathy. That is very central, and
Yeah.
also you talked about the need, from need to greed, the difference, and that is really critical thinking also. So yes, that and also wellness, mental wellness, how important it is. I think in schools, socio emotional development of children has become very central. Emotional intelligence, and this has become very central. So what would you suggest for schools to take forward for ensuring the children really gain on these aspects?
Okay. I think actually I was about to ask you another question. No, what I was saying is that when you are encouraging kids to ask questions, actually you're calling for a major paradigm shift. That means the teacher also get into a mode of questioning within themselves and outside themselves. Right. That is one part of it. Now, we have to answer one basic question. What are we teaching children for? Who has told us to teach is better? When there were no schools, wasn't life better or wasn't it? We don't know. I mean, but if you read history, you may feel there were 30 years when a man called Gandhi was living. And you know the history of this country. People were sacrificing more, they were sharing more. So we can't go back. But we schools, I think, in this juncture, will have to sit back and answer what type of human beings we are going to create in next 20, 30 years. That is one. Because resources are going to be less and less. This pandemic has really demonstrated that. The gaps between rich and poor are increasing, right? And you know so many other gaps. Human brain generally has something called mirror neurons. So if your face is sad, you don't even have to tell me. I will know it. My mind will, those areas of brain will get activated. So that is something which happens involuntary. Empathy is slightly more complex. Empathy means that I can understand your emotional state, and for the time being, I can step out of myself to extend my hand to you, or sort out your problem, or share. This is going to be one of the most important skills in next 20 years as resources dwindle. Because otherwise, if it doesn't happen, trust me, what will follow is violence, which is already happening. It is not happening on the streets of America or India or anywhere. It is happening in our minds. One major shift of all the developing countries, which I think more and more sharing has gone out of window. Nuclear families, kids are becoming, at least I can tell you of India, kids are so self-centered, opinionated, this is me, mine. That thinking has to, and it is not very difficult to teach, trust me. But the problem is when we start teaching all this, the kid is already 14 years. You can't teach this to a 14-year kid. You have to teach this to a kid of 3.5 years. Start from there and enforce some amount of sharing, right? Questioning, obviously, they will question, but you have to really tell them, let them define what is their need. If a person can do it even to 50% of the time in his life, half the problems will disappear. But I don't include politicians in that, okay?
Thank you so much.
I hope you got the answer, Amrita.
Professor Alok,
Yes.
if you can please ask your question to one of the panelists.
Oh, okay. Lisa, you have seen a lot of education systems. Actually, I'm opening this question, anybody can answer. Have we, in the process of teaching skills in the last 20, 30 years, we have forgotten how to incorporate the indigenous teaching methods, which were creating slightly more subtle, balanced individuals? Have we ignored them to an extent of We try to teach them in the classroom, but then again, classroom is a classroom. It's not life. But there are indigenous methods. Kofi can answer this actually. Have we forgotten all that, or have we deliberately ignored it, or should we induct it now?
Professor, just to interrupt you, you
Yes. Have to be
can only
specific.
ask. Yeah, you need to
Kofi,
be very.
Kofi, you know Africa, so tell me.
Well, the issue of indigenous knowledge and its application in the learning process is a very, very contentious one across the continent, in the sense that this is a continent that is still struggling with even its own language policy. Mm-hmm. As we speak, all the languages being used to instruct in Africa are virtually colonial languages. About 80% of Africa is using language that is not indigenous. And so it becomes very difficult for you to indigenize the way you teach. In Ghana, for instance, we've been back and forth struggling with education authorities and policymakers to adapt a local language of instruction. Because in spite of the fact that in some districts, only 2% of the children can read and write, in spite of the fact that in some districts, only 2% of the children are proficient in English and mathematics, you find that in districts where piloted programs using indigenous knowledge and language to teach, proficiency levels are higher over there than in this area. But then it's become a difficult political issue where governments are unwilling to adapt the use of indigenous knowledge, including indigenous language, to facilitate teaching, even though there is too many research. Ample research suggests that using indigenous knowledge and indigenous languages to teach at the lower primary level up to grade 3 enhances the chances of the child who lives in this indigenous area to become more proficient in English and mathematics in the upper primary level. In spite of this research, it has become very difficult for African governments, with the exception of a couple in Southern Africa, to adapt indigenous knowledge and then also indigenous languages in facilitating the teaching and learning process. And that is one of the challenges that civil society organizations are actually, in Ghana, for instance, we have launched a campaign. We have an election in December, and one of the key campaign issues is to compel political parties to accept that there's in the use of our languages, especially in indigenous areas, so that we can improve the quality of teaching and learning, improve literacy and numeracy in those areas, as we use the English in urban areas that are more cosmopolitan and English is widely spoken.
Right. Thanks, Kofi. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Kofi, who would you like to ask your question to?
Who should I ask? Okay, let me ask the question first, then I'll mention the name of them. Well, I am interested in finding out. It's been interesting listening to the panel, but my interest is always in the policy aspect of things. What are the policy dimensions to the discussions we are having in respect of the adoption of more learner-based systems, all the innovations we are discussing? To what extent? Because you may find that most of the things that are being discussed may be relevant only in Europe, because there is a considerable support by the state, when it comes to policy and financing. But to what extent are these adaptable within a context of Africa, where less than 0.5% or 1% of education funding goes into non-formal education? And so I asked Dr. What's her name? The one in Germany.
Dr. Lisa Marie.
Dr. Lisa Marie. Yeah.
All right.
Well, that is certainly not a simple question to answer, Kofi. we work with University of South Africa through our university, offering courses on how to teach in online environments. So I am familiar to some degree of the challenges that are being faced in Africa, particularly in terms of education and in terms of really making it available to everyone, and to be able to use the appropriate technology for those environments. In terms of policy, you mentioned, Europe seems to have their act together, so to speak, in terms of how they're, the kinds of policies that they're realizing. And I think some of the policies that they are initiating can have an impact and influence on other countries as well, particularly in the area of open education, open educational resources, open educational practice. Those are all things that are shifting the focus away from privatizing information, privatizing the education as a whole, and making it more available to everyone, regardless of whether they're in the EU, whether they're in Asia, whether they're in Africa, the US, what have you. So I think that's one of the big movements that's happening, at least within the EU, that I think will have a big impact on other countries. I also know that in South Africa, that they use Hoidigoji as part of their teaching framework, that they've introduced it as part of the teaching framework, and pushing it forward, for example, self-determined learning, because it ties in with Ubuntu thinking. And so I think, and one of the things that my African students say to me quite often is, with self-determined learning, I am finally making decisions for myself and thinking for myself. So that's kind of linking it back to what I was talking about before, but it doesn't really fit with policy unless you link it or bring it into the policy. If anybody else wants to tackle this question and help, answer it, that would be great. You can have my last minute or so.
I'd be happy if that's okay, Aaryan.
Sure.
Yeah. So just to add to what Lisa's already shared, I'll just share with you, Kofi, that in India also we have, in fact, just 6% of the GDP allocated to education. That too was announced with big fanfare fairly recently, and we now have a so-called Ministry of Education. Otherwise, we didn't even have that so far. There was MHRD, which was, or Ministry of Human Resource Development, which was also tackling education. And early childhood education was an area was not even considered earlier. There were Anganwadis, but now is with the new education policy that is actually being put into the policy or recognized completely for the first time. So a lot of these things are changing in policy also, for a very and very positively so. But when we look at the new policy, all the things that we are discussing here today are very much in it. And now that is now yet to see the implementation of it, how it goes. But there is a lot already in implementation. When you talk to, we have a whole host of progressive schools here who are taking these things forward. And, the pandemic helped us connect with schools across the globe. It became easier to connect virtually as we are all connecting today. So recently my children from a school here in Gurgaon, India, had a virtual exchange program with children of refugee school in Kenya. And children have built really long-lasting relationships that will continue forever. The exchange program may have ended soon. But the kind of discussions and deliberations and how children are learning and how children think is very similar in a lot of ways. And yes, student-led approaches to learning are very key and need to be there and are possible. And if that school in Kenya is able to do it, I'm sure we can in many more schools. So also with Opportunity International, we were interacting with many schools, and it's about finding ways. And I've really seen in Africa many schools, different countries within Africa, finding ways and changing for the better. So that is something that we are doing here, you're doing there, and I'm sure it's, let's just stay positive about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amrita. I have a question to Cassandra. Cassandra, you've been working in the K-12 sector with school leaders in schools. Now, could you please suggest a few supportive strategies that could help in fostering uh, lifelong learning within the school ecosystem, the formal education system?
Certainly. One strategy that I think is really helpful is if an entire campus, a school, adopts, for example, some measurement tools, some rubrics to start looking for some of the traits that we're watching for in lifelong learning, so that we shift the focus of the assessment off of, do you remember all of these details, and into, are you living into these skills? So if we can do that as a campus, then grade-wise and across the disciplines, we can be having conversations about where are the kids struggling the most, where do we see the least efficacy, what could we be doing as a team collectively to really shore up the skills that our kids need to be surviving. So just really, I think it's a matter of giving teachers the tools that help them make the mind shift that Ella was talking about earlier. How do we actually do that work? I didn't grow up in that system, so I don't know how to replicate that system. So if we start talking about what we would look for in the performances from students and how we could give kids clear indications of what the quality indicators were so they knew what they were driving toward, that would be helpful.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. If you may please ask one question to any of the panelists.
Sure, mine is for Ello, actually. You talked about mind shifts, and I agree that we do need to have that mindset change. How do you get that to happen in educators, especially when we didn't grow up in this system?
I think whatever change we are expecting, let's not get too worried whether they're going to happen soon. Trust me, we have to catch educators, and this is nothing against age. We have to take new entrants into the teaching line. One. Second, that those new entrants have to be trained. So that's why I was telling Amrita that we have to bring in a whole new set of training the teachers. That is very important. They are coming from a system, at least in this India, where questioning is not allowed. If you find half the doctors, they are also not used to questioning. So that inherent, it is all about telling. It's like giving knowledge. We have to catch a group of young teachers who are new entrants, create a new module and paradigm of teaching them, and performance indexes have to be built. That has to be tested over time. So if you ask me today, I am looking at a decade. Maybe after a decade, we will have students. Suppose somebody enters a school at 3.5 years of age now. You have a set of teachers who have entered now. Hope for them to grow in next 10 years. Well, nothing is going to change. So obviously, let's look at a longer thing. Because even if you tell people to question, a culture which is not given to questioning has inculcated an amount of social anxiety for questioning, even in your familiar setups. Forget the school. The households, people don't question. How many of children actually go and question their parent that no, this is the issue? These days kids do, but that is a small percentage. Largely it's not happening. So a larger thing and when kids go and ask the questions to their parents, they get rattled. They'll say, what are they teaching you in the school? Amrita will vouch for this, isn't it? Every parent teacher meeting is that my son is doing this, my daughter is doing. Daughter and son are questioning. So let us look at a decade, create a cohort which grows together, and then take it like a ripple across the country or state or whatever.
Thank you so much, Professor Alok. Now
Yes.
we move to the next round where I'll be asking you a few questions. I begin my question by asking this one to Dr. Lisa Murray. So, Dr. Lisa, what do you see are the core issues around lifelong learning or fostering lifelong learning in a formal education setup?
Well, I think there's a number of issues that need to be addressed when you're trying to realize lifelong learning within the classroom. You need to think about what are the skills that we need our students to have in order to be successful as lifelong learners in the future. And these are things like Alec was saying, the importance of critical thinking. Empathy is very important. They need to have technology skills. They need to be digitally literate. And they need to be able to evaluate those digital resources to be sure that those are really accurate and correct pieces of information, that they're not filling their brains with misinformation. So they need to be able to, evaluate these in a very critical way and to determine whether or not, these are useful. And also one of the things that I think is a key issue when you're thinking about, building these skills within my student is you need to give them opportunities to succeed and fail. And you need to give them opportunities to build their self-efficacy, to build up their experiences, so that they can go out into the world and not be afraid of failure. Because if you're afraid of failure, you're going to go out there and you won't take the risk, you won't take the opportunity to try something new. And we need innovators, we need creative thinkers, particularly within the workforce. And so I think a real key issue is to bring it away from, to really encourage lifelong learning, is to bring it away from the focus on teacher-centered teaching to learner-centered learning, and really allowing them opportunities to learn on their own, to learn how to learn, which I think Amrita pointed out in her opening comments as being a really essential skill. And so these are all things that I think are issues that we need to address as teachers to realize within the classroom. Now, this isn't an easy thing to do because many of our students they're accustomed to these passive forms of learning. They know how to do school, so to speak. And when you try to move them into a place where they're taking more responsibility for their learning, they're making decisions, they will often resist. However, over time, if you continue to push them to move forward, move them out of that what Vygotsky calls the zone of proximal development, move them out of that place, get them into a place of chaos, they will thank you in the end. I've had many students come back to me and say, I've learned more in all of my years of schooling in this class than I ever have. And I hated it, but you pushed me into a place where I was actually learning and taking responsibility for my learning. So I think those are some of the key issues. It's very challenging as an instructor, as a teacher, to really bring our students to that place where they're taking responsibility for their learning and really engaging in the process rather than just passively absorbing and then basically regurgitating what they've learned. And I think Cassandra and Kofi and Amrita have all given really excellent examples of how we can do that through experiential learning and authentic assessment. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa Murray. My next question is to Dr. Alok. I'll give a context before I ask this question. So we also engage with young people in fostering prevention of violent extremism through education. So in the school setup, how do you do conflict resolution? So usually, if two kids are fighting in the corridor, the easiest thing a teacher does is if the teacher witnesses that, in many cases, the teacher would end up calling these two to the cabin or to the classroom and then ask them to either shake hands or to resolve the conflict in front of her. So this is one thing that usually teachers end up doing. So generally whenever we engage, we tell teachers, if shaking hands could have solved the problems, the world issues that we face today would have been solved. So giving this context, I ask you this question: is lifelong learning a mindset, a process, or both? Or is it something else?
Yeah, and the world leaders have taken hugging beyond shaking now. They go and hug each other. Even that is not resolving anything. So anyway, a hug wouldn't resolve anything. No, see, what is happening in this context which you gave me is it is anti-experiential actually. You are trying to impose a set of behavior to resolve the situation. Now the question is whether you are resolving the situation for your own anxiety or for the stakeholders. If you tell, go shake hands or I'm the teacher, shut up, sit down, they'll sit. They will step out of the class, they will never fight. They will go and do whatever they have to do. Kids are like that because kids are doing what Lisa just mentioned, a word called experimentation and failures. See, try to understand, lifelong learning is innate to the mind and we learn by failures. We don't learn by success so much. Unless the mind feels a traumatic event, it will never go beyond the resolution. And if you look at the development of anybody, the brain networks are formed by the environment challenges, the brain responds. Sometimes the brain pokes the environment will respond. This dynamics goes on till you become an adult. And even then you keep learning. Everybody's learning. So how do you do it? It is a process, definitely. There is no doubt about it. Lifelong learning is a process. Your brain will never learn or remember anything which it has not experienced. Trust me. Trust me. Whether even if you go and see a God, unless you have really seen the God, you can on a superficial level do anything that you want. But that experiential thing is very important. So what do you do with kids who are fighting? What do I do when I do Mahatma program, an hour with the Mahatma? Amrita, that is a program which I do with Mahatma Gandhi. I said, Ki, take this situation, let us pose it to the whole class, find out your solutions, and act on the best ones. You want to kill? Kill. You want to be friends? Be friends. Create a situation. And sometimes we have to create situation for kids to shake them up. Then they will seek the answer. But I can vouch for this. If you really create a situation where you give a freedom for two kids, go and fight. I'm sitting, I'll watch. I can bet, except of barring one or two who are maybe having some illness, 99% kids are not going to fight. Am I right, Amrita?
Sure.
They will not do it.
The
they
fun
would have,
the thing is not allowed.
They would have experienced an alternative window. How do you tell them an alternative window? We are not telling them an alternative window. Tell them, see, take an electron. In quantum physics, it has a lot of probability. It takes one path. Show them all the probabilities. Tell them. And if you wanted more, do a mock class. You say, make two groups, let's fight to the end. Nobody will do it. That is experiential. All right. But that has to again bring in a lot of creativity in the class. Teachers who are so, they are so bogged down by completing their syllabus. But adults also have to learn to resolve their own issues like this first. They are telling things which they do not know how they are doing it. So that is very important. It's for everybody, actually. Lifelong learning is for everybody. What has it got to do with kids, man? We are learning. I learned so many things today. Isn't it?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Alok.
Yeah.
So just to add to what you had to say, so basically, instead of just resolving conflict for that particular moment, like what you were saying, a teacher could also prepare the child to resolve conflicts beyond that particular point. So thank you so much, Dr. Alok, on that one. My next question is to Kofi. Kofi, what is the role of lifelong learning in reducing inequalities and achieving the sustainable development goals?
Well, basically, we all appreciate the fact that lifelong learning provides an opportunity for people who are not able to enroll in formal education to acquire skills relevant to their economic survival. We live on a continent where about 2/3 of our people live in the informal sector. And when you have a majority of people living in the informal sector, you should always appreciate the fact that opportunities for skills development, the development of the person, are always through lifelong learning mediums and not through the formal system. And so it is even more critical for countries in Africa to prioritize lifelong learning, because if we don't prioritize lifelong learning, we may not achieve the SDG, not only SDG 4, but also the skills-related SDGs, as SDG 8. because it so happens that most of the skills training interventions in Africa, majority of them, not most, majority of skills training intervention are actually demanded for and supplied in the informal sector through non-formal means, which are all part of life learning. And also opportunities for skills upgrading are purely, within the processes of lifelong learning. That is why it is very, very important for us to prioritize lifelong learning in respect of not only its contribution towards achieving SDG 4 and 8, but also its tremendous role in ensuring that our citizenry become economically empowered to battle poverty and live economically decent lives. It's actually a poverty eradication tool, as I see it.
So much, Kofi, for your response. Now my question is to Dr. Amrita. Dr. Amrita, what are the challenges in embedding lifelong learning in the current context, given that we are all online? And what are the opportunities in the same context?
Great question, Aaryan. And I think it sort of brings together a lot of the other questions. And I was also reading some questions have come up in the chat box. So like everybody has just said, that it's a paradigm shift that we are talking about. And the current context where we are all online is already another paradigm shift as far as we in education are concerned. So currently, when those conflicts actually happen online. And we've had to find ways, and we're dealing with children who are digital natives. Every generation is better than the previous one. They are smarter. And especially when it comes to technology, they are way smarter. And teachers are still equipping themselves. There is still that process of change. They are evolving. Sorry. They are learning as we go along. This pandemic has been a situation where you're put into the sea and you're learning to swim. So, yet, thankfully, we've done it. But the important thing here is discipline in a school, whether it is physical or online, doesn't work like army. It works like an orchestra. It has to come from within. It has to be built into the culture. So discussions like the one Professor Alok talked about a while ago need to be part of the everyday process or everyday interactions in a school. Life skills, therefore, which CBSE has been talking about since a while now, are very, very key. And they need to be, it doesn't have to be something that we do as one period and there the matter ends. It is something that is built into everything we do. So when we talk about SDGs or when we talk about global perspective or understanding the globe, or when we talk about critical thinking or any of the skills that we may consider important for the future, in anything to do with content that we are teaching, these need to be built in. It's intertwined. And it's all intertwined when you're able to break through the very, very fixated boundaries of subjects. It needs to be the larger domain. It needs to be multidisciplinary in a lot of ways. And what we, in a normal school, what we do physically, I usually have a lot of learning centers all around where children are allowed to explore and different children will go explore different things. And finally, the teacher brings them around and gets to it. Challenge is you obviously need very, very different teachers. You have to train them. One thing that has worked very well, and I would like to use the term professional development rather than training here. One thing that works beautifully is joint practice development, a term given by Professor David Hargreaves, and I'm using it here. Through this pandemic, it has been beautifully seen in my experience in the school. Teachers, all the teachers are learners, and we all agree. And everybody is facing challenges. Everybody is finding ways. Of course, now I too cannot be didactic when I want them to do something in a certain way. So my way of going about developing them and changing the mindset is also also going to be, very, very inquiry led. So the teachers find solutions to a lot of these challenges. Each teacher conducts a PD session for the others. Everybody, sometimes co-teaching happens, and sometimes, a lot of collaborative thinking on lessons happens. And finally, they come around with solutions. They come out with solutions, and those are the best ones. I, as one person, cannot come out with as many solutions as my team of 200 teachers will. So that is the beauty of it. And change is always tough. Parents will always, we're talking about the learner here, but one very key stakeholder in a school is the parent. Now with technology, parents are viewing the lesson every minute. And you will always have all kinds. Somebody will nitpick, okay, why did the teacher say this word like this and not like that, and so on, and many more things. Or when you introduce anything that is different, there's bound to be, for example, self-evaluation. um, oh god, huge challenges. How can a child do it? Why is the teacher not correcting? So it takes a while for them to figure out, well, the teacher's actually doing more work. We're doing sid marking and the child's, but the teacher's also correcting doesn't mean that the teacher isn't. But what's important is for the child to understand the mistake first and to rectify it, and to not at all feel any kind of pressure around it. So all that shifting of mindset takes time. So somebody recently gave that analogy that your mind has this rider and the elephant. The rider wants to do certain things, will agree with some rationale provided, but the elephant will be the lazy one, will say, oh no, nah, I don't want to do this. Why should I? The earlier one will come back on all those things. So we have to tame that elephant. Technology is one of the elephants to tame around us, and so is a lot else. So is a lot of the old baggage that we carry. The elephant in the room, that needs to be tamed. And that happens when slowly and steadily you provide some structures, some systems and processes. And sometimes you say, no, this is how it is. And this is why it is so. You've got to. So,
Amrita,
Thank you so much.
I can sort out one problem for you straight away. If you find a parent peeping onto the screen, tell them that we will not take exam for your kid. You, mother, father will have to come and give the exam. They will disappear.
Ready.
Now that brings me to
the obsession with marks has to go away, sir, for me to be able to say this to parents. That is still there, and we are still struggling with that.
So that brings me to a very interesting question that a lot of teachers would have in their mind. What you assess is what you teach, or so it goes. So my question is to Cassandra. So we have been talking about lifelong learning for a long time now. I mean, say it's not something very new, right in the pandemic that we are talking of. So do you see assessment tools, whether it's like, international assessments by Cambridge or by any other board that you see, that account for, say, assessment of skills that form a part of lifelong learning? Or is there any assessment tool that takes care of this at present, right now, as we are speaking?
So what I've learned about assessment is there's no one tool that does it for everybody. And I can put what I think is a perfect assessment in front of somebody and they'll say, this is a terrible assessment. So it's really up to us as educators to try to figure out what's the best assessment. So if I think about that standard or that learning expectation that I have for my kiddos, what's that application that's going to make the most sense to them? To Lisa Marie's point, that's going to engage them and not be passive, but they're interested. They want to embrace this, and then they tackle that complex problem in a way that produces not just here's the information back to you, but here's something that I've created that can help solve a bigger problem that I can share with a bigger audience than just my teacher. So there's a real purpose for my doing this work. I think what happened in this last pandemic, it was kind of a challenge, but it also had some silver linings to it. And we saw science in the kitchen. We saw science in the backyard, and kids were finally leaving the textbook and going to do the work and learning the process of scientific investigation and then coming back and talking about that. That's what we want. Right. So to go to Coffee's point earlier, we can have limited resources and yet we have the whole world around us. So how do we tap into that? How do we help how do we help our kids who have an abundance of thinking and skills available to us and tap into that resource in a world full of chaos and limited options sometimes?
Thank you so much, Cassandra, for your response. Now we move on to the next round, and we are limited by time. Uh, so what we do is, like, we take a few questions that are pressing. So the first one that I take, it's a very generic question, but nonetheless very important. To inculcate lifelong learning, it is quite possible that a teacher is unable to complete the syllabus and then is held accountable. It seems that in rigid systems, the educator is stuck until there is a major policy shift. So what do we do? This, I think, resonates with what Kofi was talking about. Who'd like to take this question? Kofi?
I can.
Oh, yeah, Cassandra, please.
So I deeply believe that we as adults need to be learning together. And Amrita talked about it, Lisa Marie talked about it, Alec talked about it, we all talked about it. But we do need to sit in teams and say, okay, so when you think about all this stuff that we were required to teach, what's the most essential of the most essential? How do we tackle that? And even though all of those things are on our plate, they don't all require equal amounts of time or resources. And our kids are not blank slates. So let's do a little pre-assessment work. They might not need everything we have in that curriculum. So as teams, let's work together to look at evidence, talk about where kids are, figure out what's most essential, and then hold ourselves accountable as we work our way through that agenda.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. The next question is, I want you to differentiate lifelong learning from research conduction. Can you please explain to me, asks Eric. So just to add context to it, also, like, if you look at, there's always this thing that you equate lifelong learning with adult education or non-formal education. So is there any difference, or how do you look at lifelong learning? Who would like to take this question? Professor? Okay.
Well,
yeah. Okay.
So,
Prof, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Dr. Amrita.
I only wanted to say that, lifelong learning more or less involves learning that gives you what you ordinarily wouldn't get in the classroom. And so it involves the development of the person, the civics, skills, very, very important. And so you find that there is a confluence in a way, between what you call lifelong learning and also non-formal, because non-formal is about categorizing education on the basis of how they are delivered. Okay, so you have non-formal, you have informal, and then you have formal. Formal takes place within the classroom. Informal takes place within the environment of the mastercraft person and the apprentices. And then the non-formal targets learners who are not in-school learners, but then most of them, mostly adult learners who are learning through informal, and then some of them learn actually through formal, because some of the functional literacy approaches are actually formal, but it is outside of the classroom, and the targets are not conventional. The targets are not usually conventional students, but are actually adult learners.
Thank you so much, Kofi.
Can I just add to it? I think there was no place for this, but let me go back to what is lifelong learning. See, if you just take a minute, the life is continuous. You understand? The nature, the geography, the history, the civics, the physics, the chemistry, the biology, it is a very, very linked process. There is a thread of unity in it. But as human knowledge grew, it was not possible for one mind to know everything. That is why this divisions of subject was done, and each of them is trying to understand life and world from its own angle, philosophy from its own angle, physics from its own angle, but still they are somewhere they're united. Over time, with the specialization, what has happened is that people know one subject. That is the flaw with the school education as it is now. People get so much absorbed in the subject that they are not able to go beyond and see the unity of it. One big purpose of lifelong learning is to take the knowledge of a subject and really place it in the whole context of life, that unity. Right? And now, whatever that takes research or whatever. So I just wanted to emphasize this. This is a look at the whole continuity of it. Then lifelong learning will become a play.
So just to add to that a little, now just wanted to say that lifelong learning is not something that is necessarily adult or necessarily linked to research. It starts right at the beginning. It's even in early childhood education. If we look at the Montessori approach, and so many others, there is Reggio, there are so many others, all the forward-looking approaches to learning. Lifelong learning is actually built into them. The child explores and learns, and that is also a kind of research, if you want to call it that, but basically that's how we learn. A human child moves around, will not sit at one place, will touch, feel, and check out everything around, and that's the way we learn. It's just about providing the same, a little bit of structure, and facilitating in a safe environment, so that we are able to ensure the children learn what we really need them to learn. But they are the ones taking ownership, they are the ones leading the way, not someone else for them. And even if someone else is, someone else is assisting, someone else is supporting, being there and guiding, helping them come back to the right path if they deviate too much, if needed at all. And that's that. And of course, everything boils down to the way we assess. It works backwards from there. So the way we assess, if we put in the right kind of rubrics in place, the right kind of learning outcomes in place, which are not content specific, but skill specific or competency specific, that is where it'll flow backwards from. Even the lesson, taking the bare essentials, and actually children, based on their interest, build on it to get the rest of the, right? But the competency is key. Once that is sorted and the child is interested, and the child is aware of or loves to read, they can explore, they can learn anything that they want to learn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amrita. The next question I'm reading out, just give me a moment. Can lifelong learning bring an equality between teachers and learning as knowledge creators for individuals to win and grow? This is a question. So I'll just repeat the question in context. Can lifelong learning bring an equality between teachers and learners as knowledge creators for learning to win and grow? So, Dr. Lisa, Cassandra, please feel free to.
Yeah, I would like to respond to that. I agree. There is an opportunity there to create equality between the teacher and the learner, because there's a transition that happens where responsibility and control of the learning process moves from the teacher to the learner. Sometimes then it moves back to the teacher again. I've seen cases, in Australia, for example, where they've realized self-determined learning as one example with young adults between 10 and 12, where the teachers have actually had to go out and learn more about a subject, where the student is actually driving the learning process and saying, I'm really interested in this topic, and the teacher has to go out and learn more about it in order to support the student. One of the things that people will often say to me, well, if our students are making more decisions about their learning, if they're responsible for their learning and are agents of their learning, then what does the teacher do? And I think the role of the teacher becomes even more important, because they're the ones that are guiding the student, that are providing, they're the guru, they're supporting them, they're connecting them with other resources, they're giving them information that they need as they need it, when they need it. So I think what you're saying about, does it move back and forth? Yes, I think it does. And it depends on where they are in terms of the learning process.
All right. Thank you so much,
I add to
Dr. Lisa. Cassandra, after your response, we will move on to the next round. So thank you
just
so
very
much.
quick.
Sure.
Just very quickly, I won't be long. I really love everything that you just said, and I would add that there's a high degree when you're really deeply learning, it's not just gathering content, there's a high degree of that intellectual risk-taking and that vulnerability. And the best thing we can do as educators is model that as we walk alongside our students and let them see us fail and struggle so that we show them what productive struggle looks like and how to work your way through it.
There's one last really interesting question that I think we should not miss, and that is, can we use social media and games to foster lifelong learning?
Oh,
Social
yes.
media and games.
Why not?
Who would like to go for this one?
Life is anyway a game. So education, if you take it as a game, kids will learn it faster. No, but I mean, beyond this, I think it again all depends on who is using it and how. These are all technologies, right?
Yeah.
Technologies have to be used creatively. Like, for example, let me tell you, I work with a lot of disabled kids, especially with learning disabled and kids who have autism and all. We recently made a small app for self-directed working with the kids who have dysgraphia. With autistic kids, see, their brains are also growing. They're also learning. Any kid with disability is also learning. Technology can become really handy there because it will bypass our limitations and create that space where this disabled kid can learn. Again, so who uses it and how creatively is the question.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Alok. Now we move on to the next, that's the final segment of this panel discussion. Uh, I request our panelists to respond to this question. What should educators start, continue, and reimagine to effectively foster lifelong learning? So anyone can start with the answer.
Can you repeat the question? You're shocking me now.
What should educators start, continue, and reimagine to effectively foster lifelong learning?
Educators should sit down at their home quietly, educate themselves every day, drop their baggages, open their mind, think in more radical ways of imparting knowledge.
Thank you, Professor Alok. Yes, Cassandra.
I know that originally you said stop and then you said reimagine, but I do think there are some things we need to stop. If we want kids to be able to take intellectual risks and make mistakes, we have to stop grading everything that moves and averaging and holding things against, because some of our policies and systems are part of the problem. It's not that kids don't have skills, it's that we've locked them in with the final results. I think we need to start creating those assessments that ask really provocative questions and produce something meaningful on the other side. And I certainly think we need to continue modeling and being lifelong learners ourselves.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. Who would like to go next?
Yeah, I think that educators will have to, one, to be very innovative in adapting indigenous learning systems that facilitate much greater learning. It's very, very important for educators also to be very, very dynamic and then contextual in their approach to education. And very important also for educators to continuously upgrade their capacity and to adapt more participatory learner-based systems that makes the whole process of learning interesting and attractive.
Thank you so much, Kofi. Dr. Lisa Murray, if you may, please.
Thank you. Really, I just would reinforce the points that I talked about in the opening statements. You know, building in creating a learner-centered environment with authentic assessments, with having dialogue with your students. I think those are really critical. I think our teachers need to continue to be flexible, available, and adaptable. You raised the question about social media and technology. yes, I think technology is an important part of this. However, we shouldn't use technology just for the sake of using technology, but there should be a really meaningful pedagogical basis for using it. It needs to be something that's not just supports, that isn't just for the sake of using it, but it supports the learning process. For example, in one of my courses, we use Twitter, and we have our students follow researchers in the field, and they've built relationships with people, and they've connected with people using that social media. So I would encourage teachers to continue to use technology, but use it in creative, innovative ways that allow your students to explore, to connect, to collaborate, to adapt, and of course to learn. So that's those are the points that I would stress.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa Marie. Dr. Amrita?
Just unmuting. Okay. Well, everything almost has been said. So I'll try to sum it up very quickly. One is, I think educators need to curtail the very sense of being didactic, speaking more. So we need to speak less and listen more. That's very key. The other is giving learning in the hands of the learner is a very, very tough process. So for that, educators really need to adapt, learn, change, build relationships. It's very important. Build relationships because children learn when they're inspired to do so. And that's key. So know the learner, know each child, know why and where they are, and reach out to them to where they are and take them forward from there. And the third and the most key is value themselves. Educators are at the center of the learning process, no matter what comes our way, technology or whatever change, educators, it won't work without inspiring educators. So while the system may not, while very often the parents may not, while very often the management may not, our salary packages may be abysmal, but we need to really, really value ourselves. We are important to the process. We are the guru of the system. And in India, that's a very, very important idea.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amrita. The While I conclude, I'm also going to link what you have said to the next panel discussion that we are coming up with. So I could just, the moment you said that, I had a smile on my face. So thank you so much for that. Now we are almost at the end of the panel discussion. As you all know, this is a moment for us to shape intentional and inclusive policies and nurturing practices towards creating an ecosystem that is empathetic, compassionate, mindful, and one that fosters a space for all teachers and learners to grow and thrive. Educators and school leaders, I believe, truly have the power and potential to affect this positive transformation. I understand that we still have a lot of questions that we may not have been able to cover or sufficiently answer them through this panel discussion. And I look forward to hearing from you your thoughts, ideas, suggestions on how we can empower learners and educators in the entire process. Please send me an email or tag us in your posts on social, and I'd be delighted to know more from you. Also, do suggest what you would like our future discussions to be on. You can follow all our panelists on Twitter. You can find their handles. We have tagged them on our Twitter and other platforms. Our next panel discussion is on the 18th of August at 5:30 p.m. India time. That is GMT plus 5.5. And we'll be discussing the question, what role do parents play in the transformation of education? I thank all of you for sharing such amazing ideas throughout this discussion. On behalf of the Global Citizenship Foundation and the Council for Global Citizenship Education, and on behalf of all our attendees, I extend my deepest gratitude to our panelists for taking out the time from their busy schedules and enriching this discourse through their amazing ideas, insights, and experiences. I also thank you for being a part of the OELF family and for everything you've been doing to advance the discourse on transforming education for human flourishing. See you soon. Until then, take care, stay safe, and spread love and compassion. Our world needs it more than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you. It
Aaryan.
was such a
All
pleasure.
right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you, Aaryan. Have a
Thank
great
you so
weekend,
much.
everyone.
All right. All right. Thank
Discussion.
you.
Bye.
It's a happy staycation.
Thank you.
Let's
Bye.
drop a mail and be in touch.
Sure, I'll be
Yes.
sending a connecting mail soon.
Please send a
Okay,
connecting mail to all of us so that we
Sure.
can keep raking our brains.
It was a
Yes,
pleasure to have you.
definitely.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Okay. Bye.